Hey folks, this is Shane from Performance EV. Today we're going to take a look at where we are with our electric Porsche 911 project. Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. For those of you new to this channel, this is my project to put a Nissan Leaf motor into a Porsche 911. So today I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to do a bit of a project update. There've been a fair few moving parts over the last few weeks, and when I actually look back at the project, it's been going for nearly a year now, and you know, there's a lot of videos out there. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to watch them, so I figured I might as well give an update of exactly where we are with the project, what the next few steps are, and also just to answer a few questions that have popped up in the comment section of various videos, because I know not everyone has time to troll through the comment section. So hopefully this will be of interest to you guys, and yeah, it gives you an insight into a bit more of an insight into the project. So as I said, this is my project to put a Nissan Leaf motor in a Porsche 911. So over the last few weeks, I've been doing a fair bit of work to get things like the inverter and the motor in place. So we're going to take a look at those and show you exactly what's been done. So big jobs on this project have really been around this engine bay. Obviously there was the mammoth task of actually removing the Porsche engine. So that came out in one big block of engine and gearbox, and took me about 3 days to do. But I didn't really have you know, an idea or a feel for the real dimensions of this space until then. You know, I could kind of get a tape measure in behind things, but it only gave me a partial idea. But ultimately I saw enough that I felt, you know, space was going to be tight, but I'd be able to find a way to get the Nissan Leaf motor into the project. So with the engine out, it was then a question of trying to fit the motor, and this is definitely an area where I received a lot of questions, so I'll touch on those later. But ultimately we've ended up with the motor in place so that the Nissan Leaf gearbox is kind of lined up with where the drive shafts need to be, and it's been secured, you know, front and back. So with that kind of in place, then the next task was adding the other components. So there's kind of two sides to it. One is the inverter, so we're trying to get power to this motor, and then the other is the drive shafts. So I've done a fair bit of measuring and review and that of the drive shaft, so I think we're at a point where we can kind of start on those next. And then we've also just kind of finished the initial wiring of the signal wires to the inverter. So the next step in terms of that power delivery is going to be the much thicker power cables that will go from the 3 phases on the inverter into the motor. And then of course the step after that, once we've got the drive shafts fitted and the inverter, you know, wired up to send signals, and then also wired up to the motor, is to get a battery of some description hooked up to the inverter. And I think what I'm going to do for this project is probably get some sort of battery in place, just to get the engine spinning, check things like clearances of the drive shaft and all that sort of fun stuff, while trying to find a more suited battery. And then of course once I've got the finalized battery, then comes the pretty heavy task of trying to build a battery box to fill this space, so that I can make optimal use of it and get as many modules in, while also making sure it's secure and protected from the elements. So that's going to be a fun task. But yeah, in terms of project updates, we're actually getting close. You know, we've got this mounted, we've got the gearbox in place, and we've got the drive shafts lined up, and we've got signal wires going to the inverter. So we're getting close. But let's just take a look at the drive shafts and take you through some of the decisions on that. So in terms of the drive shafts, I basically looked at two options. One was to try and reuse the entire Porsche drive shaft, but that would have involved finding some way to attach the output flange from the Porsche gearbox onto a section of the Nissan Leaf drive shaft, I guess the CV joint housing effectively. And at one stage I actually thought that might be the way forward, but on talking to a few people and getting a few comments in the comments section, a lot of people pointed out that would actually, I guess, change the weight distribution and the pivot point of the that CV joint, and could actually put some strange pressures on the various bearings in the system that they weren't designed to do, that weren't within their kind of design parameters. So what I've decided to do is go with the original plan, which is basically for this first iteration to chop the two drive shafts in half and basically weld them together, with the intention of ultimately getting one of the slightly longer model of Porsche drive shaft, getting one of those on each side, cut to length, and new splines in the Leaf pattern machined out of them. So that will give me actually basically a Nissan Leaf CV joint with a Porsche drive shaft and outer CV joint, with no strange welds or anything in it, which I think will actually be the better solution longer term, better able to handle power and less likely to fail. And we are getting there with those drive shafts. So I am currently working on the next video. I've already started it, which is going to focus on those drive shafts. And basically, I've got a pile of bits to work with. So that's basically where we are with the project and what we're planning to do in the next few steps. But I also wanted to address some questions that have popped up in the comments section. And I think probably the best way to do that is, first of all, just give you a bit of a brief history of this project. So about a year ago, I bought a Nissan Leaf motor on eBay with the intention of doing some sort of electric car conversion with it. And one of the big questions I do get asked is, why the Nissan Leaf motor, and why not a Tesla motor or something? And to be honest, at the time, the main thing that was driving that was availability and price. At the time, there were a few Nissan Leaf motors I could get my hands on, and they were running at about a quarter of the price of even a small Tesla drive unit. I think now, about a year and a bit later, the Tesla units have actually become a bit more available and have dropped slightly in price. So it's probably only about 2.5 to 3 times the cost for the small drive unit, and 3 to 4 times the cost for a large drive unit compared to what you pay for a Nissan Leaf motor. But at the time, I didn't have a phenomenal amount of money available, so I bought a Nissan Leaf drive unit, and I think I was quite fortunate. I got a complete drive unit stack, so that was the kind of charger, power delivery module up the top, then the inverter, then the motor with the gearbox attached, and it also had a good chunk of the wiring loom, and as well as all of the kind of high voltage cabling that comes with it. And this was a car that also had the optional CHAdeMO fast charging port. So I actually have, you know, a bunch of useful parts, even if I don't use some of the bits in the middle, that I can retrofit for this car. And, you know, looking at things objectively, the Nissan Leaf unit is actually quite a compact setup, so I figured that I would have a good chance of being able to fit it into a wide variety of cars. So in terms of the project, that meant I kind of kicked things off, started to strip it down, and it was only after, you know, I'd done a tear down, gotten myself comfortable with the I guess the inner workings of you know, an AC electric motor of this size and complexity, that I felt, you know what, I can push ahead with this project. And so I went looking for a car. Now, in terms of a car, that is the other question I get. Big question I asked is why the Porsche? And quite honestly, it comes down to the fact that doing a conversion like this actually is a lot of effort. Takes a lot of time commitment. It invariably costs you a bit of money, and you know, there are headaches along the way. There are things that would make you just want to give up and not progress any further. And if you don't have some sort of, I don't know, emotional connection with the vehicle you're working on, there's every chance you could give up. I know, yeah, if I was just trying to convert a run-of-the-mill saloon car, I probably, there are times when I would have just said, forget it, you know, this isn't worth it. So I wanted a car that I actually really liked and really wanted to do. So I started looking at the cars that kind of came out, you know, when I was learning to drive, when I was in my late teens, into cars, and all the ones that I couldn't afford back then. Still couldn't afford them new now, but 20 odd years later, they are a lot more affordable secondhand. And given that I didn't need the motor or the gearbox, I was willing to look at cars that were maybe suffering a little bit, but you know, didn't have everything running 100%, because I knew I was going to be getting rid of a fair few bits of the components. You know, so if I came across something with a check engine light, that wasn't going to be the end of the world. So yeah, I looked at cars that I had wanted, or lusted after even, when I was 18, and a few came up. This Porsche was one of them. There was another Porsche convertible that I tried to get my hands on, but I was outbid on eBay. And I also looked at a Maserati coupe from about the same era. But yeah, this one came up. It was on eBay. It was the cheapest one at the time, and pretty much, I'm pretty sure from looking through the sold listings, and since then, it's still the cheapest one that's gone in, at least this year. Is bought totally sight unseen. I was told it was running, but that was about it. So yeah, that's it. Basically, in a nutshell, I really like the car. It's one that I've always wanted, and yeah, that kind of, I knew that would give me the drive to complete this project. So that's not to say that this car has been without its challenges. It's definitely given me some things to think about, and it's also kind of driven some of the decisions. Which kind of brings me to some of the other questions that people ask. One of the big ones, if you accept the fact why I chose the car and why I chose the drive unit, is around my choice of using the Leaf gearbox. So let's go and have a look, and I'll take you through kind of my thought process there. So having covered the main decisions that I made around the project overall, the choice of the drive unit, the choice of the car, I also get questions about some of the more specific decisions that I've made with the car. So one of the big ones is, why am I not using the Porsche gearbox? So quite a few people, when they're doing these sorts of conversions, probably one of the simplest ways, because it involves removing fewest components from the car, is to basically just couple the electric motor to the gearbox, the existing gearbox. And you know that it does actually work. Generally you don't want to put like the entire clutch mechanism or anything in place, because these types of motors are not designed to have a huge kind of mass spinning on them as you would with a clutch and flywheel, but they can be hooked up to a gearbox. And with a modern manual transmission, they can handle being changed without a clutch, as long as you're gentle with them. So you're probably not going to end up using all the gears, because there's so much torque in these motors, but you might use 2 or 3 of them, and as long as you adjust the speed of the motor at the point you're changing gear, you can actually get them to change gear. So that's with a manual transmission. With an automatic, it's more difficult. That's not to say it's impossible. I have read about people's projects where they have actually managed to get to work with an automatic transmission, but it is more challenging. One of the big things is that automatics expect to be attached to a moving engine. So while a clutch on a manual totally disengages the spinning of the motor from the gearbox, with an automatic, it's actually designed to work in that it's always spinning, so it won't change gear unless there's that rotation happening, which means that you really always need to have the motor spinning, even when you're at a standstill. So there are some efficiency issues with that, not major, but there is a loss there. And the other thing is actually controlling the automatic transmission. So something needs to decide when to change gear on the automatic, and in a modern car like this, that is the transmission control unit. Now, depending on the car, it kind of depends on the complexity, but this one with the Tiptronic unit, they are actually quite complex, and they're looking for information from not just the transmission itself, but also from the engine, from the ECU. And from my perspective, in terms of choosing what to do with this setup, this car was a Tiptronic, so I looked at the challenges in getting an automatic transmission like that working, and to be honest, I didn't want to take that on, not on this project anyway. The Tiptronic setup is actually quite smart. So things like, you can put it into a semi-manual mode, and the idea is that it takes information from all over the car, and if you were to try and upshift using the manual setup or the buttons on the steering wheel, but you're in the middle of a corner, it won't actually change the gear for you. So it's a smart system, and the problem with smart systems is they require generally a lot of inputs, and I don't think in any reasonable amount of time that I'd be able to spoof all of those into the transmission control unit. So I decided, right, that's not an option. We'll keep the transmission came out with the engine. We'll keep it out. So there's another option, which would be to purchase a manual transmission, and they do appear online from time to time. But again, they're not exactly cheap, and I did actually have the Nissan Leaf gearbox here. It came with the package I'd bought, And yeah, so I kind of decided to go with that. One of the other challenges is the way the engine and transmission mount in the Porsche. So they're kind of designed to be a very rigid combined system with the engine and gearbox bolted together, and they actually only mount to the car at 3 points. There are 2 mounting points at the back attaching to the engine, and then 1 at the front attaching to the transmission. And I don't think there's any way I can match that rigidity by bolting this Nissan Leaf motor, and it means that the Leaf motor is probably going to end up having to take some of the weight of the transmission, which will challenge in terms of any sort of adapter plate that I put on to hold the Leaf motor to the transmission, but also the coupling that I would need to have inside. So assessing things on paper, I just felt that the challenges combined with the cost of buying a new manual transmission versus really just giving it a go with the gearbox that came with the Leaf was the way to go. And I guess added to that, one of the things that's been in my mind is doing all this sort of stuff with the electric motors that are out there. It's all kind of new. And one of the questions that have been asked about the motor is, can it handle the power? Can it give me the performance that I want from a Porsche? And all the evidence says yes, but there's only 1 or 2 examples. And I think what we need to do here is just try and see how far we can push these components, see if they actually work in this sort of setup, or if there's a weak link or something that just doesn't work. And if that happens, then we'll take it out and we'll start again. We'll try something different. I want to see how far I can push this motor, and you know what? Might as well see how far I can push the gearbox as well. And when it comes to that, how far we can push the inverter. It's used by Nissan to produce a certain power figure, which is probably a half to a third of what the Porsche did. How far can we push it? How far can we? How much power can we get out of it before we have to go and look at some other way of doing it? And if one part of this system reaches its limit before the others, then we'll switch it out and we'll find a way to put something in place that can handle it better. I think the inverter is going to reach its limit at probably 50 or 60 kilowatts shy of where I want to be, but we won't know until we try it. So yeah, I mean that's kind of a lot of the decisions and drivers behind the drive unit and how I've fitted it. I looked, and you can see some of the videos. I end up spending quite a few weeks on it at a few different orientations for this this motor, and with the space available and ultimately deciding that I wanted to use the Nissan Leaf gearbox, this was kind of the best option. I'd love to have it actually the other way around, to leave me with more space in here for the batteries, but that's not the way it's going to work. So another area that I frequently get asked about is the inverter. My initial plan with this inverter was to try and use it in a few different flavors. The first one was going to be using it with the original logic board that Nissan had put in place, and then try and control that using basically the CAN commands. So spoofing the CAN messages that Nissan would send to this from the vehicle control module in the Leaf, and trying to get this to react based on my version of that. And I started looking into it, but with the still learning, still building out my understanding of CAN and that sort of stuff, and also building out my understanding of some of the smaller control software and boards you can get, so things like the Arduino and that, it was actually going to take me quite a while to come up with this. I have some knowledge of development, but I'm not a developer, so it was taking me a while to work through that. And since then, an open source control module has actually been released by Damien Maguire, and it could apparently control this. So I still have the old Leaf board, and maybe I'll go back and try it, maybe not in this project, maybe on a different car in the future. But from my perspective, I kind of decided that rather than spending weeks and weeks and weeks trying to write code and troubleshooting that, and ending up maybe with something where I wasn't totally comfortable with the how it would work, would it be safe on the road, I decided to go with something a little bit more proven. So I've been read through a lot of different communities and boards around electric car conversions. And there are a few different kind of people out there trying to create open source or more available replacement logic boards for for different cars. And the one that jumped at me was the work that was being done on the open source inverter, which has since opened as a kind of separate forum. It was some people that were quite active and probably still are very active on the DIY electric car forum, but they've gone down a path of creating this and really buying into this open source inverter. And to be honest, I really liked what I saw, and the approach that was being taken to make it work. So essentially the core software and the core even core hardware design of the inverter is being reused in a range of different operations. So if I can get my head around the software and how it works for the Leaf, I can reuse the same learnings and knowledge on a Tesla or a Prius motor. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, instead of spinning my wheels trying to write code, I decided I'd bite the bullet and went for the open inverter Leaf drop-in board, and that's essentially an adapter board that I got just as a bare PCB and had to solder up, and then the actual logic board, the replacement open inverter logic board, which was I bought as a complete unit, mainly because it was surface mount, and I have no skill at soldering surface mount, so I didn't want to screw that up. But that's been installed in here, and it seems to be working. So we'll have to see what happens when we get it hooked up to the motor properly in the car. And the other question that comes up frequently is about the amount of power that this inverter and this motor will produce, and will it make what the Porsche wants. So the motor itself seems to be potentially the strongest component of the entire Leaf setup. Nissan themselves are now using the same motor and pushing out more power than in the model that I've bought. And there are people out there that have gotten 200 plus kilowatts, 300 odd horsepower from the Nissan Leaf drive unit, and that would actually put it right where the Porsche was in terms of power. So that's the goal. This inverter itself if I'd left the standard Leaf logic board in it, I don't think I'd have been able to push it past the 80 kilowatts that the Leaf produces. With the drop-in logic board, the open inverter one, it's a bit more of an unknown. You know, there's no software that's going to limit how much power I can put through it, and it's actually going to be the components inside the inverter that are the limiting factor. You know, can the IGBTs draw and pull that much power through? I think the general consensus is I'll get to higher than what the Leaf produced, but I won't get to the figures that I'm targeting. For that, I probably will need to build out my own inverter with, you know, slightly more powerful IGBTs and other components. But I should still be able to use the same logic board and the same software to control it, which would be a big bonus. But yeah, that's the inverter. I've figured out where to fit it in the car. You know, one of the things I'll need to do over the next few weeks is actually get that mounted, and then attach the wire to go to the motor to actually drive it. So I hope that's given you a bit more insight into the you know, this project, where we are, and also some of the drivers and decisions behind it. This has been, you know, a fantastic project so far. I've learned a lot. You know, I've built up new skills, and I'm really looking forward to the next few steps when we can actually potentially even get it moving under its own power. You know, I've taken an agile approach to this project, where I'm trying to kind of get the bare minimum together to get this moving, and then from that I'll learn various things, and that'll then allow me to make you know, sensible choices when it comes to the improvements and enhancements. You know, so the plan is to get this moving under its own power with, you know, custom fabricated drive shafts, and, you know, 3/4 of the mounting structure and that sort of thing, and you know, maybe batteries that are a bit inferior from what I'll ultimately need, but they'll allow me to assess what I've done so far, and then make the best choices in terms of you know, enhancing and improving those pieces. So I hope you'll join me for, you know, the rest of this project. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing. As always, any comments are appreciated, and I'll try and answer them, and, you know, anything that comes up in the comments section, it has fed into decisions I've made on this project. I've received some really good advice and feedback there. So yeah, thanks for joining us on the project so far. I hope you'll continue to watch. But till then, see you next time.